Eh, Boa tarde. Eu gostaria
Good
de
afternoon.
agradecer e, ao mesmo tempo, saudar a
I'd
todos
like to thank and greet everyone here
autores,
today, officials, investors,
a senhora Susan Segal,
Ms. Susan Segal,
agradecendo ao ministro
and I
Diogo
would also like to thank Minister Diogo for his presentation because he has greatly facilitated things for me in my own presentation.
Eu já começo com a possibilidade de politicamente
I can use
dizer
his presentation as a springboard to say that the Temer administration is really an administration focusing on reforms.
eles
The
mostram não
numbers
só
we've been
a
seeing
vitalidade da
show
economia.
the vitality of Brazil's
Eu
economy.
confesso que não sei se por deficiência das estatísticas ou a
I'm not
capacidade
sure whether this is due to lack of proper statistics or lack of
do cidadão brasileiro,
an entrepreneurial spirit amongst Brazilian families, but I can tell you
foram demonstrados
that the results we've been seeing
muito antes do que nós supunhamos.
came way before we expected them.
Ele fortalece a confiança interna
This kind of
e
environment
externa,
strengthens
sobretudo porque, como o presidente
trust and confidence both domestically as well as internationally. Like President Temer said earlier, the government knows where it's headed,
fazendo
it knows where it wants to go.
fruto de estudo
All
bem
of
feito,
these reforms
mas
are
mesmo antes
backed by careful studies. Even before President Temer took office, back when he was still
nós já
acting
tínhamos
president,
notado o partido que ele presidia
his political party
tinha lançado documento chamado A Ponte para o Futuro,
published a document called A Bridge to the Future and another document called A Social Crossing. And all of the initiatives currently being put in place are included in those two publications. This means that from the very beginning, we believe that these were crucial to ensuring stability and the success of our society. We need things to be
saber antes
predictable.
do que vai
People
acontecer.
need to know ahead of time what's about to happen, not just individuals, but also corporations,
Organizem-se para que
so that they may be prepared, so that they may organize themselves and make the proper decisions vis-à-vis investments and
crescimento
growth projections, expenditures,
necessário
etc.
esse preceito democrático ele esteja muito presente e aqui
We need things to be predictable,
está presente.
and things indeed are predictable.
Agora, como estava já escrito nesse
Because all of what we're doing now has been a part of those two documents from the very beginning. As Minister Oliveira just mentioned,
posso diretamente falar
we've achieved a great many things in the last few months, so now I'll focus on concessions and infrastructure more specifically.
na medida em que o Brasil vivia a crise mais grave da nossa
As
história,
Brazil went through the single worst economic downturn in our history,
realidade do enfrentamento era de natureza fiscal,
we believe that we should face it
a ideia da PIB.
first and foremost from a fiscal perspective. PPPs would not be enough. We were missing one of the P's in PPP. I mean, we had projects, we had private and public sector, but they didn't come together, so to speak. So, with that in mind,
As medidas tomadas no país buscar
as we put in place the necessary measures to ensure a swift recovery and reduce the unemployment rate, because we had a total of 12 million unemployed individuals when the last government administration left office,
nós
so
precisávamos do investimento privado.
we concluded that we really needed private investment. And for private investment to be available, we needed to change the entire regulatory framework in place. That was a regulatory framework that applied to concessions in the road transportation sector, also the airport and port industries.
Pouca coisa se fez até agora.
But very little was done
Esse, o nosso
in the
primeiro
way of road expansions. So that was our first step, that was our first effort.
e se consultou mudanças de natureza
We
regulatória
made regulatory
baseadas
changes
em regras muito
based
efetivas
on
que foram
very
praticadas
effective
e que
rules
geraram não só
that, albeit
segurança,
effective, were not
mas
put in place and actually generated a lot of
proliferação
distrust
que hoje nos
and
faz
jeopardized the level of
viver
organization that we
um
needed.
processo
As a
de
result,
apuração de quebras de regras de compliance por empresas
today we see
e
multiple cases where
lideranças
companies and
políticas.
political
É
parties
um
have
processo longo
become
e
non-compliant with these
desde
rules. This has been a
10
long
anos
process in place for over 10 years.
uma outra
It started even before the car wash
é,
scandal,
e
uh,
o que nós
in
temos
another bribery
mostrado,
investigation scandal.
comprovado e demonstrado com tudo isso é a força
We've been able to
das nossas
show that
instituições.
our
Essas apurações,
institutions are
elas
strong, they're
atingem
robust,
empresas
even
de
though
grande
these scandals may
responsabilidade,
affect
elas
some of
têm
the largest
capacidade
companies and some of the
de
largest
atingir
entrepreneurs
lideranças
and
políticas
political parties
importantes do
and
país,
political leaders in
mas
the
as
country.
instituições
The institutions remain.
funcionam, o
The
poder
judicial branch
legislativo funciona,
continues, the executive and
a
legislative
Polícia
branches remain
Federal,
strong, the federal police remains
investigações
strong, the public
professores
prosecution service
já foram
remains
julgados,
strong, and some of the defendants have been taken to court, some of them have been convicted, others have not, and they've always been given the opportunity to defend themselves and to answer any charges or
que sejam
accusations brought
para
against them.
que nós tenhamos condições de, em um nível mais operacional,
So, from an
adequar
operational
as mudanças
perspective,
ideológicas,
we
por
are
exemplo,
making
tirar
changes,
a
in some
obrigatoriedade de
cases,
participação
ideological changes.
do Estado nas
For
concessões
example,
anteriores
the state is no longer required to
era obrigado
participate
a participar
in
até
certain concessions. Back in the past,
a
Infraero
ambulância
had to participate at 49% in all the concessions given out in airports, and this didn't take into account some of the biggest risks in place because the private companies knew that at best they would participate at a rate of 50% rather than full participation. So now
trabalhar com a fixação
the
prévia
government
da taxa de
no
retorno
longer
e
defines set
cobrança
return rates for
de pedágios,
tolls,
como
for example.
se desse por questões ideológicas e não por estudos, por
And
avaliações
this is not a matter of ideology. This is really the result of
agora
careful calculations.
obrigados, os empresários são obrigados a fazer
So
contas para
now,
avaliar
business people have to
a taxa de retorno,
actually do the
esse
calculations, look at the return rate
que tem
to determine whether
o
investments
interesse necessário para satisfazer o
will
apetite
be interesting enough to satiate the appetite of those willing to invest in infrastructure in Brazil.
prazo mínimo
We've set a minimum deadline, or a minimum amount of period that must transpire between the
criteriosa
publication of the auction and the auction itself to give people time to prepare so that we won't see absurd bids like airports being won for 19 million reais, as if they were something much cheaper than they actually are. I mean, these numbers simply don't make sense.
além disso, além dessa diferença de prazo, que o mínimo é de 100 dias,
So the minimum amount of time that may transpire is 100 days between the two things, but that might be expanded given the level of complexity of the infrastructure
criamos conselho
in
presidido
question. So we've created a council with the attendance of the president and a number of other ministers, like the Minister of Planning, Minister of Finance, the Ministry, the Minister of Mines and Energy, and the Minister of the Environment,
tomadas de maneira mais
so that environmental decisions may be made more transparently, more clearly, and so that we may know clearly which inspector is causing problems. That makes all of our assessments, all of our studies, much more well-founded. We no longer have a requirement where a single address should be used. Also, competition has improved amongst state-owned banks such as Caixa Econômica, BNDES, and Banco do Brasil. Banco do Brasil, in fact, is in charge
um sindicato de bancos
of
privados,
running
não
a
há
private banks
nenhuma
union.
restrição à participação de
But there's
investidores
no
estrangeiros,
restrictions to
operadores
the
estrangeiros, de
participation
maneira
of
muito
foreign
clara,
investors or foreign
para
operators.
o leilão ter qualquer tipo de associação com empresa
These
nacional.
people don't need to be associated with domestic companies to participate in an auction. Everyone has equal rights, foreign and national. Also, the financial or the funding methodology has been changed. There's no longer any bridging loans, and this makes it so that private investors no longer have to work with a single bank. We also want to strengthen the debentures market and adopt market rules based on the experiences of other countries. We've discussed with the Economic Development Council, CADI, a few economic indicators that would allow us to improve competitiveness and do away with the processes of the past. The companies, we had about 5 or 8 companies only that had the necessary capacity to participate because they'd been certified in terms of security, defense, road transportation, ports, airports, etc.
And so all these areas, previous areas of concessions, had the same players generating a lot of distrust, not only internally but externally. And so these measures are yielding results, and we've already conducted auctions in electricity, distribution, also in the port sector, several ports. Next Thursday, we'll have the Santarém port. We will auction 2 areas in Santarém port, and we successfully had auctions in the airport area with 4 airports bought by foreign companies. These are very traditional operators that have a lot of experience in the sector. And they are aware that the nature of the concession contract will change. The contracts were not concession contracts. They were works contracts because construction companies participated in more, they actually were more interested in construction than in the provision of services. We now have no construction companies participating in these auctions because due to the nature of the contract, it's linked to the quality of service delivery with metrics that will allow the regulatory agency to keep track, and the service providers will know exactly what the nature of the relationship is and how the contract will be executed. We also introduced the possibility of arbitration in order to prevent an excess of judicialization that we used to have. I have already been advised that my time is almost up. Ambassador Jaguaribe actually seems to be monitoring here my time. We have already conducted these auctions that I mentioned briefly, and now we are going to start this semester the 4th round of oil and gas fields in May, and with this we will begin to bring to life all those changes that were made in the oil and gas sector. We have 35 lots or batches that will be auctioned this semester. And for the second semester, we have to face a problem that for Brazil and for the
é fundamental.
Brazilian transportation logistics is very crucial, which is the railway sector. The government always made political decisions in terms of railways, and so we have a lot of railway lines that link nothing to nothing, and so there are several areas actually, or rails that lead nowhere, and so we decided to place ports and railways as Siamese twins. And so every railway needs to leave a port and arrive at a port. So there is no railway concession that will not be connected to a port. And we are sure that we will be successful in the next semester when we auction the North-South Railway. There's already been a lot of expressions of interest by several groups, and in addition to that, we have 2 more railway opportunities that will be included, that will be auctioned. I hope to meet all of you again so that we can specifically address this agenda. This agenda has already been announced. We've had 2 meetings, and when the president approves and announces the calendar is a Gregorian calendar that is being fulfilled religiously. The public administration loves to make calendars, but this is a Gregorian calendar. We actually fulfill it so that those of you who invest and those of you who wish to be operators can organize yourselves and with greater predictability. I'm sure that we will meet shortly so that we can bring you to participate in this effort to improve Brazilian infrastructure. Thank you.